I have not been shy in sharing with you that the E65 7 Series was an inflection point in BMW history, specifically design. It was the point at which we went from attractive cars, beautiful cars, to something where you had to explain the design to me, which is never a good thing. However, today, we're going to turn over a new leaf. This, I would argue, is going to be the day that you and I are going to drive the first classically beautiful BMW in 17 years. Let's start this episode a bit different by taking a break from the usual 2-liter direct-injected gasoline turbocharged engine we find in crossovers and talk about a 4.4-liter twin-turbo V8 that has 523 horsepower, comes in at 5,500 RPM, stays flat all the way to 6,000 RPM. But far more interesting to you and I, 553 pounds of torque, comes in at 1,800 RPM, stays flat all the way to 4,600 RPM. But it's not interesting because it's 553 pounds of torque or where it comes in. It's interesting because you need to Google what's the torque output on the current gen M5. Delivers power in the same personality as that M5 we drove a year ago at this very same track, but obviously not exactly as much power, but still, man. Santa Maria, Madre de Dios. We're touching 120 there, 125. Wow, does it work in this scenario and work quite well? Come around to the more technical part of the track. And the beauty of the twin scroll turbo, in this case 2 turbochargers, you can have power pretty much anywhere from about 1,800 RPM all the way up to about 5,000 RPM. That's where it's usable. Forget about what they actually tell you the thing can do. For those of you not familiar with the aviation world, that is called a tail dragger, and it is sorta kinda a rear wheel steer system, at least on the ground. The M850 kinda borrows a page out of that, in that it has a rear wheel steer system fitted to it, but it's very similar to the 4-wheel steer systems that we've seen on other cars, in that low speeds, the rear wheels steer in the opposite direction as the front wheels to basically give it the effect of a shorter wheelbase car. And then at higher speeds, the rear wheels steer in the same direction to make lane changes or maneuvers a bit quicker. Well, where the M850 is a little bit different is that line of demarcation, the speed at which it does that changeover is different based on the mode you're in. So in comfort, it's at 45 miles an hour. In the Sport and Sport Plus modes, it's 55 miles an hour. Coming around here, let's kiss the cone a little bit. That's nice. I didn't set myself up beautifully for that turn. Clean it up a little bit here. Very direct inputs here. Shockingly for this size of a vehicle, which we just talked about. Come around to the straight, and this is where it changes a little bit. As tight as the steering is, way down low, let's go back up, see if we can hit 125 again. I'm not going to say vague before brake, but it's not quite what the M5 was. So we're going to have to come back to the steering when we drive the M version of this car, which they showed us today, but sadly I can't show it to you. There's a dirty secret that I have yet to share with you in this episode, and that is this is a 4,500 pound car, specifically 4,478 pounds. So you can imagine that's a lot to manage getting around a track. So BMW's thrown a lot at it to help it drive in a BMW-esque way, Freudenfaden. Couple of things. Number one, there is an M Sport differential fitted to the M850. And then number two, adjustable dampers are on offer. The car we're driving has them fitted to it. But the number three, more importantly, there are active stabilizer bars front and rear that manage the side to side, basically the body motion of the car going around the track. How does all of that work together to manage 4,500 pounds that has 523 horsepower to push it? Or pull it, because it is all-wheel drive. Like, you don't notice much pitch or squat, which is fascinating with a 4,500 pound car, especially as I get out of the plane of motion there. Another secret to share with you, especially in light of starting this episode by saying this is the first classically beautiful BMW in almost 20 years. Underneath that beautiful exterior is a G35 series. Well, sort of. What they do is they pilfer the front double wishbone suspension from the M550, the multi-link unit from the M550, then they shorten the wheelbase from 117 inches down to 111 inches. So let's come around, understand what that diff does as I push it a little. Ooh. Oh, that was super fun. So it opens up a little bit. It allows me to control the car a little bit more than, say, 100% of all the driving dynamic stability control systems. It allows you to drive the car with your right foot, which so many of these luxury, larger GTs from Germany, you're not allowed to do that. The computers set it up for obvious reasons, because this is a $120,000 car. You don't want to go into that wall there. They want you to keep your investment shiny right side up. Something incredibly important to point out, the M850 is fitted with a brake-by-wire system. So what does that mean? The brake pedal is not at all connected to the rotors, the pads, the calipers, any part of the vehicle that stops the car. So what happens is the pedal in the computer translates what your foot is telling the car in terms of, hey, we need this much stopping power. Now, I didn't notice any fade, and the feedback from the pedal was very consistent throughout that time. You'd expect it with a brake-by-wire system. But where you and I really need to focus on is living with the vehicle. What's it like in the canyons, driving it in traffic, driving on the freeway? That's something you and I are going to do when we get the car towards the end of February, early March, and do a living with episode. As we accelerate more, I do have to make a note about that exhaust. It is amplified, it is fake, but wow, does it sound incredibly good, especially on this small, tight, technical track. Come back around to this back long straight, where I want to point out there are more houses here than there were last year. Really something important to note about this, it's easy to drive fast. You know, you jump from car to car to car on tracks like this, and if it's not a Lotus, if it's not something that's set up to do track stuff, it's harder because you have to get to know the car and you have to get to know its personality before you put 4,500 pounds around a track like this. Spent a lot of time reflecting upon the M850 on the drive back from Palm Springs because frankly, I was surprised how much I like this thing. Very possible I was swayed by finally a beautiful exterior on a BMW after so many years, but it was the combination of, yes, driving dynamics. I did like the interior, not everybody has, and the fact that a car that is not designed for the track did so well on the track. But really, once I reflected on the, hour or so I spent on the track, I realized why I was so surprised. This is now a growing segment. What was a year and a half ago that the LC500 came out? There was always the S-Class Coupe, there's the DB11, and there's probably some more that I'm forgetting. And let's put aside 911s because this is not a 911 territory, only in price. And the reality is there's so much choice, but here's one that's attractive, delivers power the right way, and frankly, the driving dynamics are probably the best out of the entire segment. And when you think at 111,000 US, that's a hell of a bargain over a DB11 and competitive against an S-Class as well, which I would argue couldn't do what we were doing today in this episode. So with that, I'm going to say this is probably my favorite in the segment. Something to do with price, and yes, a lot to do with beauty. But now I'm going to turn it around to you and ask you, what would you choose if I made you choose a brand new LC500, S-Class Coupe, can't be the S63 because it's a different price point, or a DB11? What would you choose and why? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV on Word, MotoManTV on Word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I'm going to say I'm going to come back to you with 2 more episodes from our day out there on the track with an M340i as well as a Z4 with the 4-cylinder engine. I tried for the 6, but sadly they wouldn't go for that on the track. Anyway, until I see you then, bis später.